So as you sit at your next meal, ¿tiene sabor? O sea, those cultural roots? Or has it been transformed into the monocultural phenomenon? Ese fenómeno que ha esterilizado el sazón for likes and following through those garnished filters. Esos filtros that provoke anxiety, simulation for social acceptance, and they feed on 60-second spectacles. Over the last 9 episodes, we've trekked through las raíces, the roots, defining sustentabilidad, o sea, sustainability, as a return to food's ancestral wisdom. We've connected those roots to the present rambles, desde el sabor to sazón, to la carne asada, from seasonality to those taste cravings. Today, let's begin to close this temporada, this season, by asking yourselves, what seeds are we planting for the tables de mañana? Now, hold that thought. Hello, and welcome to Global Roots Rambles, de English Culture y Comida Sustentable. Soy Dennis Arvizu, your host, y charlador de confianza, guiding you through this jornada where we blend sabores, stories, and sustainability. Aquí exploramos how the food choices we make shape our culture, nourish the world, as well as those around us. Ya sea en la cocina o en el estudio, everyone has a seat at the table, así que tomen asiento and let's get this ramble started. Okay, bienvenidos a la comida de hoy. Antes que se enfríe, let's begin. Así que, what happens to heritage flavors en nuestra era de los viral food trends? So, picture your phone lighting up con todas las notificaciones. You open it up and you get this overhead shot of rainbow-looking bagels or the latest ube croissants, or better yet, that authentic birria ramen, or esa Foodielandia. You know, you decide to swipe once, de repente something else pops up, takes over your screen. Each one of those, o cada uno de esos viral bites promises authenticity while compressing those centuries of culture into these 15, 20-second montages. Lo interesante del caso is today digital anthropologists nos están advirtiendo, letting us know that this obsession with hyper-virality is equaling hyper-flattening, o sea, that monocultural phenomenon. And that's why, because cuando las métricas principales is the watch time, the context, la narrativa se reduce to this visual shock, la estética, lo superficial. Think about it. Look at the color, mira the mouth-watering cheese pull. ¿Qué piensan? You know, something to digest or chew on últimamente is if we look at el TikTok, no? Ese hashtag categoría food. It racks up more views cada semana than Netflix tiene en subscribers. And that's worldwide. Así que si la pantalla se ha vuelto en esta, let's just call it plaza pública, pero también si la pantalla se ha vuelto a la vez to this trailer que corta la historia justo before the context, antes del contexto. So then think about this. What's the latest dish that you tried porque it looked like fire on your phone, online? ¿Recuerdas sus raíces? ¿Su sazón diverso? ¿O solo estás recordando el trailer con ese filtro? So let's zoom out of your screen for a second and into esa cuchara that's in front of you. So as you look at that spoon, think about esa comida confort, you know, that comfort food. That food that feels like it's giving you a hug, pero un abrazo de ese cual reminds you, te recuerda de algunas cicatrices, scars, historically speaking. Does it? Or when was the last time that happened? Think of hard shell tacos con queso amarillo, yellow cheese. This invention from the 1940s in Texas that became this fast food pragmatism. It's a very different phenomenon than the 1500s in Tlaxcala, where culinary geniuses, los tacos, prevailed. Or let's think about that Incan supergrain, quinoa, la quinoa. What 20 years ago, when I recall, was this comida indígena de a lo pobre. Today, it's become this luxurious wellness craze that you find in a bowl de un precio que te cuesta el ojo de la cara, que no. Mientras tanto, hoy en día, los agricultores bolivianos can't even barely afford their own harvest. But yet here we are thriving on this luxurious grain while they struggle. Or think of the childhood, la niñez, that mac and cheese, macaroni, that was that craft security blanket. Ese neon polvo looking, supposedly queso or cheese. You'd be the judge of that. But that was born out of, the dairy surpluses during the Second World War. It was that comfort, ese abrazo, that hug, but it was built on surplus politics. That's what I'm going with this idea, is that colonization está inscrito, it's written in the daily flavors, esos sabores cotidianos. And we've inherited not only ingredients, pero those power structures que siguen vigentes today. So piensen en esto, think of this. El comfort no siempre conforta a todos. Sometimes solamente le da comfort a los empires, o sea, enterprises. ¿Qué piensan? So today, we're buried in these digital food cultures, esas culturas digitales sobre la comida. Pero my thing is that, can we preserve those cultural roots, or do they erase culinary heritage? Are they? The researcher Deborah Lupton attracted my attention porque le ha llamado al Instagram. She's called Instagram the new dinner table conversation. O sea, la conversación que tenemos cuando estamos sentados a la mesa. How often does that happen in your home? Think about it. So if that's the modern dinner table, and dinner today doesn't have those cultural foundations, beginnings, ese abuelismo, let's just say. ¿Es la misma mesa? Is it the same table that we grow up knowing, that we recall, that we remember, that we would like? Mientras estamos en la mesa, si nos ponemos a pensar in this algorithmic logic, what is it? Well, it starts con eso de short stories, those 15, 20, 60-second spectacle. Pero to please this algorithmic, I don't know what to call it these days, god of worship, you need to amplify those spectacles, right? And at the same time, by doing so, we're rewarding same likeness, because we all want to be the most novel foodie, Instagrammer, TikToker. So we feed off one another's feed, but we camouflage the sameness, this novel sazon, pero monocultural, because let's face it, is there roots behind it? So what is happening as this continues? Over the last 20 years of seeing how the culinary industry, the food industry has evolved. So what have I seen? Think of those microwavable bags where you find these reduced chocolate-looking sauces, pero según son moles, or this pho labeled as Vietnamese ramen. Solo agrégale agua caliente del grifo. Just open your sink and you got Vietnamese ramen. And just don't get me started con el pan dulce. You find these conchas densas, a veces duras, y hell, bigger than fucking turtle shells. Y los alfajores, pobres alfajores. Esas galletitas, the little cookies that came from la era de los moros, the Moors, when they were made with such delicacy and rellenas, filled with lo que había, what was around you. Today, shortbread cookies con Nutella. I don't know what to say about that. So I guess what I'm going at, lo que voy, is that these digital plazas, courtyards, if you may, we can also use them to rescue memories. Think of, those grassroots hashtags, resurrecting those forgotten heirloom grains, corns, nistamal, chocolate, la historia del cacao. So the question here is, la pregunta no es if tech or digital kills culture. La pregunta es, how do we use it? Le damos el scroll, or can we leave a comment? Dejamos un comment preguntando sobre la historia, el contexto, el propósito de lo que está surgiendo en tu pantalla. Y aquí es cómo podemos conectar those short spectacles que se han vuelto viral. Think back to the beginning where I define sustentabilidad or sustainability, that it's not a trend, it's a return. Una vuelta a las raíces de la comida y la cultura. Nada fancy, not at all. It's simple, with humble beginnings, o sea, a lo pobre. Así que para ser sustentables, hay que pensar en simple things. Think back to those abuela hacks, esos ancestral wisdom, the common sense of utilizing tomates during the summer, going for champiñones, setas, mushrooms during the fall, or how grandma skipped the meat in February porque la vaca estaba flaca, metaphorically and historically speaking. This is how we tap into that millennia, that old wisdom, common sense, nada fancy. Just going back to some of these tried and true ancient practices, they carry that modern impact that we're looking for today. Let's look at some of these ancient practices and how they can be utilized to make today's impacts that we look for in sustentabilidad. Cuando cocinamos, when we cook seasonally, we can save up to 30% of food waste. Same thing when you buy local. You reduce transportation emissions by 10, 20-fold when you compare them to those imports of buying fruit from across the southern hemisphere, breakfast tomorrow. Not to mention cultural nutrition. We think of how we can have or utilize food, utilize our culinary knowledge as a form of medicine. And it starts with eating whole nutrient-dense foods that come at peak when they're pulled off of the tree, like right now with stone fruit. La fruta que se madura on the tree, no necesariamente on a truck, boat with ethylene gas. When we talk about abuelita, the holistic approach, los abuelos skipped meat porque no había, Pero when we think about that scarcity encoded, it's a low carbon diet that promotes wellness today, but it's always been there. So today tenemos ese término fancy of meatless Mondays. Pero los abuelos, la abuela, they just called it la comida del día. O sea, de lo que hay. Common sense, que no? So here's a question for you. How do we plant the seeds for tomorrow's sustainable future? Las mesas de mañana. Living here in California, and you have redwood trees. I got one right outside my house. Esos árboles históricos, enormous. And they're so rooted, tienen esas raíces all underground, intertwined. They share nutrientes, and in such a way that es la manera que se sostienen los bosques. It's how the forests continue to live for generations. So with that said, ¿qué prácticas can we do today to have those equivalent roots back to the culture of food? Here's a few things that come to mind for me. It's seeding those heritage grains, finding ways to rescatar ese trigo de Sonora o ese maíz cónico, the blue corn. When we think today about planting seeds for tomorrow, estamos planificando y plantando una memoria, esa genética that we don't want to go to el olvido. You know, we think about health and wellness and we think about food as medicine or culinary medicine. Well, that's just broths, fermentation, esas hojas amargas. You know, it's nothing new, no es nada fancy, not these new biohacks or functional foods. They're just the abuelas' hugs, warmth with culinary medicine. So when we think about community, la comunidad, you know, think about los recalentados, las carnes asadas, how it brings la vecindad together. Think about the same thing for unas cocinas, right? Where la comunidad cooks together, shares stories, share knowledge. You know, we got to start thinking beyond those CSA boxes. Think of a CSK kitchen type thing, right? Where la comunidad itself comes together to buy food from local vendors, los agricultores que se parten todos los días en el calor de la madre and conditions that none of us want to be in. And for those that do this on a day-to-day basis, mis respetos y muchas gracias for everything you do for us. You know, today, hoy en día, what I think is most beautiful and what's most needed is una comunidad de cocineros como yo que enseña recetas zero waste, los recalentados, way to utilize las sobras con las técnicas que were once labeled a lo pobre. Pero con esa sazón tuya, your personal remix, that one that gives you that unique identity, but rooted in tradition. You know, as much as we worship the algorithmic craze, how do we use it to our advantage? How can we storytell esas narrativas so they become viral? Well, usamos those short 15, 20, 30 seconds to teach, to convey messages as to why and what nistamal matters. What do you get from it? Turn this viral spectacle into just this unfiltered reality. Common sense, shared knowledge. With each of these seeds, these practices fuel sovereignty, that cultural, nutritional, environmental freedom that we so much desire, need, and want. So as we come together in La Mesa, think about La Mesa de Mañana, the future. La Mesa de Mañana, where esas tortillas vienen del maíz co-op in Oaxaca that pays the farmers living wages so they're not famished like we see those agricultoras in Bolivia. You know, esas salsas that use tomates from ripened in your backyard or unos 20 kilómetros from your house. Esos edible maps, you know, and those garnishes, they just come from this handful of quelites. Those once were considered just hierbas, weeds that nobody wanted, but all of a sudden now they're these valued super greens. Go figure. This meal, esta comida, think about it, it's rooting you en lo de ayer. It's nourishing you today, pero it's planting those seeds, esos semillas de mañana. At least ese es el sueño. Ese es mi sueño for you. Así que para la cena de hoy, I leave you with this. Instead of going to ese challenge de los hashtags or the spectacle challenge, los dejo con una pregunta muy sencilla. Very simple question. Así que think about in 5 years from now, in 5 años, when someone asks you, your kids, grandkids, sobrinos, lo que sea, friends, what does sustainability taste like? O sea, ¿qué platillo, what dish sustentable will you serve as the answer? ¿Qué platillo sustentable are you seeding for the day after? Thank you for joining me in esta primera temporada, season. And I look forward to having you join me for the next one. I'm Dennis Arvizu, and this is Global Roots Rambles, Spanglish Culture y Comida Sustentable. Don't forget to subscribe, follow. You know, if you're listening to an audio, have more video clips on YouTube, links all in the description. Gracias for following along, and nos vemos en la próxima. With you. Ya sea una palabra, una idea, un sabor, take it with you. Compártelo en tu próxima comida. And subscribe to follow us on your favorite podcast platform, ya sea video or audio. Aquí no se trata de ser perfectos, se trata de ser conscientes y dejar que nuestras decisiones hablen con sabor y propósito. We'll see you on the next ramble.